When people first see this footage, many instinctively reassure themselves with a familiar thought: this doesn't affect me. From a distance, Lake Mead still looks like a regional issue, something happening far away in the desert, but the reality is far different. What is unfolding here is quietly influencing the water Americans rely on, the electricity they pay for, and the food that ends up on their tables every week. Lake Mead is not just shrinking, it is dropping at a pace that is pushing the systems built around it beyond the conditions they were designed to handle. This is not a single event or a temporary disruption. It is a slow-moving chain reaction that has already begun spreading far beyond the shoreline and into everyday life across the United States. When water availability tightens, everything downstream begins to shift. When electricity becomes more expensive, the cost of living follows. And when food prices rise, no household remains untouched. This footage does not simply show a reservoir losing water. It reveals a sequence of consequences that many Americans were never fully prepared for. Chapter 1. Infrastructure failing. Recent images from major reservoirs across the country tell the same story. Water levels have retreated so far that many structures built to operate on the water can no longer function as intended. At multiple reservoirs, levels have fallen outside the operating range engineers planned for decades ago. This did not happen overnight. It unfolded gradually, year by year, until the difference became impossible to ignore. Where water once met the shoreline, vast stretches of exposed ground now lie dry. Marinas that were designed to float now rest on cracked earth. In many locations, docks no longer reach the water at all. Activities that once took place daily have quietly disappeared. To keep access possible, walkways have been extended again and again, sometimes multiple times within just a few years. But these efforts only underline one reality: the waterline is retreating faster than infrastructure can keep up. Along the canyon walls surrounding Lake Mead, a pale mineral band runs horizontally across the rock face, sitting dozens of meters above the current water level. This bathtub ring marks where the shoreline once stood. No charts or graphs are needed. The contrast is visible to anyone who looks. At this point, the lake still contains water, but the systems built around it are already operating outside their intended conditions. Marinas, access routes, mooring points, and service facilities were all designed under the assumption that water levels would fluctuate within a stable range. Once that range is exceeded, the structures don't collapse. They simply stop working the way they were meant to. Chapter 2. Adjusting to long-term low water. Some marinas have been forced to shut down entirely because they no longer reach the water. Others remain open, but operate at limited capacity. These changes are often introduced quietly, framed as technical adjustments rather than emergencies. That alone suggests something important. The system is adapting to low water as a long-term condition, not a temporary setback. As these adjustments continue, they slowly become normal. Closed marinas stop making headlines. Longer walks to reach the water become routine. Infrastructure designed for long-term reliability now functions only in part, and increasingly, this is no longer treated as a situation that will soon reverse. At this stage, the question is not whether Lake Mead will completely run dry. The more pressing issue is that the entire system surrounding it is now operating on the assumption that water levels are no longer stable. When a foundational assumption changes, the smallest functions are usually the first to show strain. These images are not the climax of the story. They capture an early phase, the moment when a large, complex system begins drifting beyond the limits it was built to withstand. Historically, this is when larger consequences tend to follow. Chapter 3. Household water and energy impact. As water levels continue to fall, the effects will no longer remain confined to shorelines or engineering structures. They will increasingly appear in the most ordinary parts of American life, starting with household water use. When lake levels drop below specific thresholds, the impact moves beyond scenery. It enters the management system. Water authorities do not respond with dramatic announcements. Instead, they activate procedures that have existed quietly for years, designed for prolonged shortages. Each procedure corresponds to a specific water level. Once the lake crosses that marker, allocations to states, cities, and user groups are adjusted according to priority systems. At first, these changes appear only on paper: new limits, revised schedules, updated allocations. But once implemented, their effects quickly reach households. The earliest restrictions usually target outdoor use. Lawn irrigation is limited by day or by time. Washing cars at home becomes restricted. Activities once considered routine begin appearing on restriction lists, not because they are excessive, but because the system no longer has enough flexibility to support them. These rules are not applied everywhere at once, but once the framework is activated, no area remains unaffected indefinitely. Neighborhoods that once felt insulated begin adopting the same limitations as regions long accustomed to water scarcity. The only difference is timing. Chapter 4. Agriculture and Food Supply. Alongside restrictions comes cost. As supply tightens, water prices tend to rise, not in a single shock, but through a series of small increases that accumulate over time. Fees change, pricing tiers shift. Charges that once went unnoticed take up more space on monthly bills. For many households, the impact becomes visible only when comparing bills year to year. But for those on fixed incomes, especially retirees, the effect is immediate. When income stays the same while essential costs rise, water stops being just a utility. It becomes a budget decision. Importantly, these measures are not introduced with the assumption that conditions will soon improve. Cities update their water plans based on the expectation that low levels may represent a new normal. Management shifts from short-term response to long-term adaptation. Over time, this level of control becomes routine. Checking irrigation schedules feels normal. Monitoring water use becomes habitual. What was once taken for granted begins to be treated as a limited resource requiring constant oversight. At this point, Lake Mead has not dried up, but household water use is no longer guided by habit. It has entered a control framework, a sign that pressure within the system runs deeper than what is visible at the surface. Once water enters this framework, the next impact does not stay at the tap. It moves into the power grid. Many of America's largest reservoirs serve more than one purpose. Alongside water storage, they are central to hydroelectric generation. These systems were built on the assumption that water levels would remain high enough to provide consistent pressure for turbines. As levels fall below that operating range, performance changes. Power plants do not shut down overnight. Instead, output declines gradually. Facilities continue running, but they no longer deliver the same level of reliability. At first, consumers barely notice. Electricity still flows, lights still turn on, but within the system, a gap begins to open. To make up for reduced hydroelectric output, grid operators rely more heavily on alternative sources, often at higher cost. Chapter 5. Community Impact and Long-Term Adjustment. Over time, those costs spread outward. Electricity prices rise through incremental rate adjustments. Fees become more visible. What consumers experience is not a sudden blackout, but a steady upward trend that is difficult to reverse. Just like water restrictions, these changes are not based on the expectation of quick recovery. When hydropower operates below capacity for long periods, energy planning must adapt. A resource once considered stable becomes variable. For households, this shift has real consequences. Electricity is not optional. It powers heating, cooling, refrigeration, and basic daily life. Even small increases are felt immediately. Rising power costs also affect businesses. Higher operating expenses eventually pass back to consumers, spreading the impact across the economy. At this stage, the effects of low water are no longer limited to utilities. They begin shaping household finances more broadly. No dramatic incident is required to recognize the shift. It becomes visible in how cautiously the system operates. The lake still holds water, the dam still stands, power is still delivered, but water levels have transformed from a foundation into a source of pressure. When water restrictions and higher electricity costs converge, the next impact appears on the dinner table. Agriculture consumes the majority of water supplied by large reservoirs. When allocations shrink, the first response is not immediate crop failure, but controlled contraction. Irrigated acreage decreases. Watering schedules shorten. Some fields are left idle. Farmers adjust by switching crops or scaling back production. These are rational responses to limited supply. But within the food system, they create gaps that are difficult to fill. As output declines, supply tightens. Costs rise gradually. Some products become less available. Others grow more expensive season by season. These changes ripple through distribution networks and eventually reach supermarket shelves. Because America's food system is national, consumers far from Lake Mead still feel the effects. What begins as a water issue becomes a food affordability issue. Finally, as costs rise and opportunities narrow, the impact reaches communities themselves. Towns built around stable reservoirs depend on tourism, recreation, and local services. As water levels fall, visitor numbers decline, jobs become less reliable, small businesses struggle, property values soften, living costs rise. For many residents, especially those on fixed incomes, the balance becomes harder to maintain. Gradually, families begin to leave, not because the lake is gone, but because the stability it once provided no longer exists. History shows that systems rarely collapse all at once. They weaken gradually. Communities adapt, relocate, or fade quietly over time. Lake Mead has not reached an endpoint. What we are seeing is the beginning of a longer adjustment, one where individual decisions slowly reshape regions once thought stable. The real question is no longer how low the water will go. It is who will be forced to adapt first. If you found this video insightful, make sure to like and subscribe so you never miss our daily uploads.